So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we have a pretty, well, the closest sort of recreation I suppose you can have of the Battle of AZANULBIZAR, because this is the map, AZANULBIZAR Doom, and it is going to be the goblins on the defence and the dwarves on the attack. We've seen quite a lot of the dwarves lately actually, which is pretty neat, especially seeing as we've seen quite a lot of the dwarves on the attack, which under normal circumstances you sort of stereotypically associate them with being on the defence, especially in a settlement such as this of course. But I do think it's quite interesting to see them on the attack so often, considering how bulky they are, and especially against the Misty Mountains you'll scarcely see two philosophies that are much different really. Obviously the Misty Mountains, the most numbers reliant faction in the game, even more so than Mordor really, and the dwarves obviously all about that quality, all about that really high tier heavy infantry, which often is what brings them across the line. But we'll be going through the goblins shortly after. It's actually a relatively short battle. I mean, it's still 26, nearly 27,000 frames in total. But considering the kind of map it is, especially if the dwarves are on the defence in a settlement like this, it often ends up being quite a long battle. That is not going to be the case here. So, let's see what we're going to be working with from the attackers. The Dwarven army that is the furthest away from the main gates, we have Mighty Mirko, who's got some Mithril Guard, of course, the 3 HP monsters that they are. Should be very, very good at hacking and slashing their way through a lot of the goblins. Having said that, quite a few of the goblins also have armour piercing, so over a period of time they will still be brought down, especially if they're sent in all on their own. But still, really the strongest unit that the dwarves can muster in terms of survivability. A couple of units of Sons of the Fallen. Interestingly enough, of course, this is the battle which resulted in the burned dwarves, which the Sons of the Fallen are named for. So technically speaking they shouldn't be here, but Sons of the Fallen nonetheless. Guards of Khazad Dum, they are obviously that's 2 HP but armour piercing units that Khazad Dum have, which will still be useful because any survivability that the goblins have, especially at the low tiers, will be given to them by their armour, and the Guards of Khazad Dum will be able to carve right on through that. Legion Bodyguard are sort of the, well, they are the entry-level bodyguard really, if there is such a thing. They don't really have anything special about them like the Guards of Khazad Dum or the Mithril Guard, but naturally they're still a very strong unit. First Legion Pikes, this is something that the Misty Mountains will really struggle to deal with head-on because they are an armour-piercing pike, a distinction they share only with the Southron Pikemen, but unlike the Southron Pikemen, the First Legion have very fine stats to boot as well. They don't have the second hit point of the Karas Galadon's Guardians, but I think in most situations actually the armour piercing is a superior trait because it allows the pikes to deal damage more quickly than pikes normally do, and that is often their downfall really, or at least their weakest aspect. A couple of units of the Hammers of Gundabad, they are also locked morale, which is a good feature for them to have. The 2nd Legion are not locked morale. I don't know if they actually have any of those. Indeed they do. So the difference between these two, 2nd Legion Axe Guard, they've got a shield. They're a little bit more defensively savvy when you upgrade their armour, I would say, the 2nd Legion Axe Guard. But I do think the locked morale is a better feature if you want to punt for the Hammers of Gundabad, because it just means that you're less likely to suffer from any routing. To be fair, Khazad Dum in general are not the most likely faction in the world to rout, but still, any faction can suffer from that potentially if the battle starts to go south, but the Hammers of Gundabad give you a little bit of solidity in there anyway. Another unit of 2nd Legion Axe Guard, the Warriors of Khazad Dum, so we finally have a few of the rank and file units of the dwarves, which are still far in excess of the entry-level Misty Mountains units, albeit they will start to struggle against some of the better goblin units that you see, like the bodyguard tier stuff. Also trolls will do pretty nicely against a unit like this as long as they're isolated, but given the close confines of a map like this, I find that somewhat difficult to see happening. A couple of units there of the warriors, and finally a unit of sentries, which are the entry-level pikemen. They're not armour piercing, they're much more of your standard, just sort of everyman pike really. But even so, pikes are so useful given the Medieval 2 mechanics that they're still a very useful thing to have. So, now we shall move on to the 2nd Khazad Dum army. As you'd expect, the Dwarven forces going very much for their quality. We've got Petty 2324, who has got some Orc Hunters, so some ranged units here, including the mighty Iron Watch. If they can get within the settlement and start bombarding the goblin positions, the Iron Watch could actually be an incredibly necessary unit for Khazad Dum to have, given the huge numbers advantage the goblins are likely to have, even though they are the defenders. But this is the kind of unit which can really help with that. Much more ranged presence here as well. Standard archers, be interesting to see if they can get into a good position to shoot. The Khazad Dum Reclaimers won't have to worry quite so much about that. They should be able to get into a decent little position to use their throwing axes, and they can of course do lots of damage to several elements of the goblin army, and of course they're pretty good in melee as well with a 2-handed axe. A couple more two more units of the Hammers of Gundabad, nice locked morale goodness. some Meteor Guard with their 3rd hit point, a couple of units of 4th Legion, so the more of the base spearmen that Khazad Dum have, although it's kind of awkward because the regular Khazad Dum units, you don't really have a spear at the entry level. You have to go into your 2nd tier of Legion units before you get access to this, but they're a very fine spear indeed. No armour upgrade on them, but they're still going to be good for holding the line and yeah, just holding back the goblin tide really. Several units of them, some warriors of Khazad Dum and some sentries of Khazad Dum. Good to have your army bulked out by units like this because they're still going to out-quality most of the goblins anyway, so it makes sense to bring a few of them just so you're not horribly outnumbered in terms of the numbers on the field. And another unit of guards of Khazad Dum, that armour piercing going to be so effective I feel against those goblins. Moving on, we have Sharkan, who's actually got some mercenary cavalry. I'm not sure whether this is such a great idea. We have seen, of course, from the glimpse we saw of the Misty Mountains defensive position, they have got units they may very well sally out with. Even if they do that, though, I don't think the mercenary cavalry are going to be sufficient to stop a huge tide of Drake Broodlings and Snow Trolls. They can try, but I think Khazad Dum would honestly have just been better off trying to weather that storm with their heavy infantry, more so than going for 3 whole units of Merc cavalry. It's interesting, but I don't think it's going to be all that effective. Dwarven Miners, on the other hand, as far as a trash tier unit goes, they're at least armour piercing, and they can of course be disposable as you push up that ram to break down AZANULBIZAR's gates. 2 units of 2nd Legion Axe Guard, going to be very useful for the reasons we've said, armour piercing, very useful indeed. Loads of Dwarven Miners, this is a bizarre army from Sharkan. It puts me in mind of that all-human army for Fingolfin that Stewie tried out in the last week, I think it would have been, by the time this battle replay comes out. Kind of worked for Stewie because it's a little bit more viable, but this I'm really not sure. A few units of warriors of Khazad Dum. We have some Hammers of Gundabad back here and some 2nd Legion Axe Guard. So yeah, a very strange army this. Khazad Dum don't really have anything that can hide either, but still, we'll see if Sharkan can make it work for him. And finally, we have Medieval Feud, who has also got some mercenaries, although the mercenary infantry is a little bit more understandable because they're relatively cheap, and also they've got a bit of armour piercing as well, so they're a decent complement as long as you put them alongside the dwarves. Do bear in mind, however, that these mercenary units, unlike the stout-hearted dwarves that they fight alongside, do have low morale, so they are much more likely to rout, and the Misty Mountains do have a few fear-causing units which you should be on the lookout for. Khazad Dum Reclaimers there, throwing their axes in, Meteor Guard again for the 3 hit points, plenty of warriors of Khazad Dum, as you would expect, to bulk out those attacking ranks. Sentries of Khazad Dum, 2nd Legion Axe Guard, these ones without the armour upgrade though, so they're not going to be quite as durable. But the main event for the 2nd Legion, of course, is always going to be their damage that they can kick out, which is always quite nice. 3rd Legion as well. This is actually the first time we've seen the 3rd Legion on the field today, again without the armour upgrade, but as a line infantry unit they're still going to be far superior to anything that the Misty Mountains can throw their way one-to-one. I say far superior, they will be better than something like the Mountain Uruk Host, but perhaps not by a huge distance. Mountain Uruk Host are quite similar to Uruk-hai infantry in many ways. Orc Hunters of Khazad Dum here in force again, so again more ranged units. Merc Crossbowmen, a little bit more of an understandable pick because they do offer that ranged attack which can be useful regardless of what the situation is, and you can kite around some of the Misty Mountains fast movers. We shall see if they prove to be useful though. Hammers of Gundabad as well. So now we get into the settlement itself as we sink down inside it. We have Thanatos, who is the one who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. His general going to be in the Blackback Mountain Berserkers. Normally I don't recommend that because it takes away their ability to hide, but on a map like this it's completely unimportant, so it doesn't really matter. White Uruk Fearmongers are back here as well, a very important unit. Generally speaking, the Misty Mountains, obviously you're going to be reliant on numbers to overwhelm a faction like Khazad Dum, but also they do have some decent armour-piercing units in their roster, and the White Uruk Fearmongers are first and foremost among them, really. If they can avoid the 1st Legion pikes, then they should be pretty good on the front line against most of the dwarves. Snaga Skirmishers as well, Nawaki is also on the defence, and Bloodbath McGrath, Goblin King's Bodyguard are in there. Plenty of Mountain Orc Berserkers, more White Uruk Fearmongers, so many Snow Trolls and Cave Troll Drummers, more Goblin King's Bodyguard, lots of Snaga. So again, some strange bits and pieces going on over here. It could be that they sally out and fight in front of the gates, a la what you saw in the movie. Mountain Orc Berserkers, Mountain Uruk Host to offer a bit more of a solid middle to this Misty Mountains army. There's also Heavy Goblin Halberds, which are a good cheap armour-piercing pick. There's some more blackbacks in there. I can see their capes, Goblin Infantry, which are so cheap, but also so garbage. More Snow Trolls. There are Bolg's Champions scattered throughout here who will really do the business against those Merc Cavalry units. Cave Trolls are in here as well, so loads of Trolls, which, to be honest, the Dwarves are pretty well stocked to deal with trolls like this, especially the cave trolls. But we shall see. Heavy goblin infantry, of course, get completely outmatched in terms of line infantry stakes against what the dwarves have to offer, but they're really just here for the numbers. We shall see. Drake broodlings, they can really go either way with the Drake broodlings. At least one of these units has got to be effective though, and Drake broodlings can be very, very effective if used properly. Heavy goblin halberds are in there, plenty of snaga. There are crossbows back over here as well, which again are an incredibly important tool, and a catapult back there as well from Proxima Centuri. So it's actually a 4v4. So yeah, certainly the defenders are going to have the numbers advantage here, which is quite interesting. So without further ado, let's begin. Here you can see this is also one of those unique maps which does actually have defensive arrow tiles, albeit only 2 of them, so the damage that they chuck out is going to be relatively limited and at a slow pace, but still it just lets you know that things aren't necessarily going to go all your way. Now this is not exactly the charge of the Rohirrim, all of this mercenary cavalry moving forward as the Drake broodlings come in. The Drake broodlings do charge, and again, being in sustained melee with trolls is something cavalry wants to avoid. You can charge into trolls and have a pretty good time against them. However, melee cavalry like this is going to struggle a whole lot more, and you can see it hasn't really worked out for Shah Khan. Now, they really are sallying forth here. He's going to need to consolidate his infantry force here, I think, and hope that stuff like his 2nd Legion Axe Guard and Hammers of Gundabad are able to do damage to the mounted divisions of the Misty Mountains. And in fact, we are going to turn it down to half speed so that the lag does not become too much of a problem. You can see the mercenary cavalry, some of them are not actually routing, most of them are to be fair, but some of them aren't. They're just trying to get out of the melee engagement. All of these Dwarven miners do technically count as shock infantry, so they could do a decent job against the trolls as long as they're backed up, but an emptying of AZANULBIZAR, this, a huge sally forth here from the goblins, which is pretty neat to see. It's not often you see a siege battle go this way, but considering it is a 4v4 and the numbers that the goblins have, and the fact that Shah Khan's army is by far the weakest, I would say, of all the Dwarven forces, this could very well work out for the foul goblins. In come the 2nd Legion Axe Guard and Hammers of Gundabad. Obviously they are a completely different prospect for the trolls to face, ideally suited for bringing down the large monsters. Meanwhile, mercenary cavalry still in the backfield, Bolg's champions setting themselves out, as well as Drake broodlings really spreading their wings on the field, which will make it more difficult for the initial Dwarven reinforcements to arrive, which is what they want, because they can finish off Shah Khan's army in its entirety here, I think, the Misty Mountains, with relative ease, but if the reinforcements arrive at an ill-opportune moment for them, the goblins could start to struggle pretty quickly, especially with the quality of the units on the eastern side of the map. Albeit, I think the most dangerous army in those terms is the one that's furthest away from AZANULBIZAR's front gate, so the dwarves also not exactly known for their speed. 2nd Legion Axe Guard getting in and amongst the heavy goblin halberds. Again, it's a numbers game. All of these heavy goblin units will really not enjoy facing off against 2nd Legion Axe Guard individually, but they could be greater than the sum of their parts here, and the sum of their parts is quite substantial. Yeah, because of how bulked up he is as well, this is a good opportunity potentially for those Bolg's champions to get a good charge in. I mean, those Dwarven miners may very well rout actually. They're, as a lower end unit, not exactly fighting dwarves here, just your standard workers. And they do get a good charge in. And that should be enough to do a good amount of damage there. Arrows being utilised, heavy goblin crossbows. This is bad news for the dwarves as well. All of their heavy armour and all of their defensive abilities doesn't really mean a whole lot when you're faced with the bolts of crossbows, to be honest with you. Here, Blackback Mountain Berserkers move forward, so they continue to attack. More and more of their more solid units are making it to the front line now as well. The Mountaineeric host will make this a much more difficult force to deal with from the Dwarven perspective. In come the Drake broodlings again. Poor Shah Khan's army was never really designed to deal with this sort of thing. Warg skirmishers are over here as well, throwing their javelins in. These Dwarven miners are already routing, but the Drake broodlings are going to feast upon them anyway. Those mercenary cavalry units, only 11 of them, they're going to get in here. Can they kill off any of the Drake broodlings? Yeah, it is worth mentioning as well that one of those reinforcing armies does have a unit of Iron Watch, which would be absolutely devastating to the goblins in this kind of battle. Meanwhile, as we have a look here in the backfield, there are mounted divisions, of course, from Medieval Feud's army as well. Mercenary crossmen could kite around. They won't be able to get in here and reinforce Shah Khan all that quickly, but they will be able to help, or start to, I should say, peel away at some of these Misty Mountains fast movers. There are still a lot of Drake Broodlings running around out here. The Warg Skirmishers are going to potentially try and come in as well to ward the mercenary crossbowmen away from AZANULBIZAR's gate. Merc Cavalry are in there. 2nd Legion Axe Guard still alive. I mean, the Dwarven infantry is still fighting the good fight in melee. But there's only so long that they're going to be able to do this before they start to crumble. Just look at the Goblin Horde empty out of AZANULBIZAR. It'll be interesting to see if they get forced back into their defensive position or whether they attempt to just continue to fight outwards. I'm not sure whether they want to... Well, maybe they do want to actually spread their wings a little bit and envelop the Dwarven armies, because if they do allow it to become choke point fights, that's where stuff like the 1st Legion and the really high tier stuff from the other Dwarven armies may very well start to become more and more of a problem. Drake Broodlings pushing back against the mercenary cavalry now, who are doing their best with their swords, but like I said, they were really not up to the challenge that the Misty Mountains were throwing up against them there. So many Drake Broodlings, so many Trolls, Bolgs Champions. It was never really going to work. Mountain Orc Berserkers slamming in from the side. Again, more armour piercing. Exactly what you need against Khazad Dum. Medieval Feud's army is on the way. Slowly but surely. Those siege towers are still here. I mean, you could bring a siege tower with you. You can use the siege towers on, or can you? They actually count as buildings, don't they? No, there is sections of war. I thought so. I remember last time there were siege towers on the small part of the L-shaped walls. Bolg Champions going to cycle back out and potentially charge back in. The dwarves, a lot of the miners are shaken. Actually, the stuff that's further towards the infantry tends to be doing a little bit better, and this is where having your force made up so heavily of those Dwarven miners and mercenary cavalry units is going to come back to bite you, I think. Biter-at Fearmongers are going to be in there, heavy Goblin Halberds, Mountain Orc Berserkers, plenty of armour piercing, and of course the numbers that you need, and continuous hammer and anvil strikes. And indeed, there goes Sharkan's general at the hands of those Bolgs Champions. Another charge from Nawaki's Bolgs Champions as well. Drake Broodlings are back here. And that is I think all of his units are now fighting to the death, other than, of course, the Hammers of Gundabad, which will stand and fight to the bitter end. I mean, technically they're all going to fight to the death, but this means that they're not going to be... all of the units' stats are going to basically be 0 when they're fighting to the death. So the Misty Mountains will be able to finish them off free of charge, essentially. There are the Drake Broodlings now. I think we shall now go back up to 1 speed, to be honest. The frame rate, as you would expect, not doing so well considering how densely packed all of these units are. Charging in there with Bolgs Champions and Drake Broodlings once again, continuing to try and finish off Sharkan's army. Out here on the open field, this unit of Bolgs Champions is pretty heavily depleted at this point, and a few more volleys coming in from those mercenary crossmen should be enough to finish off these very deadly Warg Riders. Quite slow firing though, those mercenary crossmen. They do finally get a volley off now. Proxima Centauri losing micro on these units. And there goes Sharkan's army. Not sure what he was expecting with that sort of pick. I don't know whether that was a pick that was sort of enforced to add to the theme of the battle. But if it was his choice, I don't think he'll be doing that again. For good reason as well. Like, there's too much low quality stuff in there. I know that Khazad Dum often invest too heavily in their bodyguard units, but that was really the opposite problem there. You're investing in the 2 units which are, both in morale terms and just martial prowess terms, the weakest that Khazad Dum have to offer. The Drake Broodlings feasting upon the dwarves there, and the Misty Mountains going to have plenty of time as well to reorganise their defence here. It could be that this battle takes place entirely outside of AZANULBIZAR's halls, which would be quite interesting. Mercenary crossmen are here, all kinds of Khazad Dum are moving forward. I mean, Medieval Feud is certainly going to need to wait for his allies to arrive, and in fact you can see here Drake Broodlings from Proxima Centauri moving in to feast upon those Orc Hunters as well. This should probably be the end of the Drake Broodlings though, because they're going to take a lot of damage on the way through from the pikes, the spears and the hammers of Gundabad. This is the benefit, however, of the Drake Broodlings. Their mass is so high that you can pile through units and prevent them from attacking you to a certain extent anyway. Bit of damage done to the dwarves there, but it wasn't as devastating as maybe it could have been. Of course, the Drake Broodlings continue to hover around the periphery of the map. Thanatos out there with his. And the archers could be just the thing for dealing with the Drake Broodlings here. Of course, fire arrows, doubly effective against them. The most elite Dwarven army still is a long way away. Mighty Mirko continues to trudge his way across the hills. And over here, those warg skirmishers still, all of those mounted units just biding their time and waiting. In come the Drake Broodlings once again. They're going to get a charge into the warriors of Khazad Dum here. More damage done to the dwarves, and I have to say it's not looking good for the dwarves here. They're still getting bullied all around the map. I don't think Sharkan was able, if he was able to blunt the mounted units or the fast movers from the Misty Mountains. The Drake Broodlings are technically cavalry, they have invisible riders, but yeah, he needed to finish off all of the fast movers and the trolls, I think. As it is, the dwarves are still having to deal with that. They do rout the Drake Broodlings though in the end, which is good for them. Meanwhile over here, continuing to chase away the mercenary crossbowmen with a much healthier unit of wargs over here, but still continuing to take a ton of damage here. Actually not too many of them fell then, which is interesting. Mercenary crossbowmen going to engage them in melee while all of the archers in behind try to do their thing as well. And point blank crossbow fire as well, actually enough to rout those wargs without any sort of support around. So doing a pretty good job here at mopping up what remains. And this is the best use of the mercenary crossman, when you can kite backwards against a unit like this. Your micro and your awareness of what your units are doing needs to be on point if you are using the mercenary crossman, I think, but it can still be so useful. Meanwhile, still slowly trudging their way into position. Do they have units inside? Still they do. Just in case they do need to pull back, this is the units that they have in reserve, but so far so good for the goblins. And just look at the size of their armies. Like in terms of quality, yes, but that Sharkan army was so bizarre and so low quality that it's definitely put the dwarves on the back foot here. The Orc Hunters of Khazad Dum though, going to start to try and put some dents in the Misty Mountains force. They're actually going after the more depleted Heavy Goblin and Halberd unit. You should be going after this unit over here that's got more to it. Try and weaken the bigger units. Heavy Goblin units do have armour, but I have noticed that in Divide and Conquer the Heavy Goblin units' armour values are more impressive. Here it's more sort of very average, very average, and their stats are of course low. But you would expect that with such a large unit. And the dwarves are really slowing things down here. They are really big, and it's interesting because this isn't the longest Dwarven siege map that we've ever seen at 26,000 frames, so I'd imagine things are going to get going pretty quickly. Once they do, when the next phase of the battle begins. For the time being, it's just a little bit of light skirmishing the dwarves are doing, trying to peel away some of the numbers that the Misty Mountains still have at their disposal. The Bolg champions are going to retreat as they continue to get prodded by the mercenary crossbowmen. Mounted Uruk host out here as well in loose formation. There's also those blackback berserkers also. Not entirely sure what Petty is doing over here. He has completely stopped. Maybe he's waiting for Mighty Mirko to arrive. He'll be waiting for a little while yet because so much of his army is still traversing these hills, but such is the nature of this map when it comes to its deployment zones. And I do wonder actually if the Misty Mountains, if that's the case, they could try and swallow Medieval Feud's army whole as well, and this would be pretty much the ultimate example then of how you really need to consolidate yourselves. If you allow yourselves to get destroyed one by one, because they could do it, I think, Misty Mountains. This army has got a little bit more to it than Sharkan's army had. It's got pikes, for example, which will be good for holding the line. It's got more damaging infantry. But through sheer numbers, they could definitely do it. They would also pretty quickly silence stuff like the Orc Hunters of Khazad Dum, so I'm quite interested to see if that is indeed how they decide to approach things. Here we have two Drake Broodlings, who are still routing, and they're going to go through the Dwarven ranks. They're not going to do any damage, they're just going to barge them out the way. All of those dwarves will get back up, and indeed one of them actually gets run through by a pike as they retreat. It's a bizarre battle, this, in the way that it's laid out, because it's the sort of thing where I would imagine I wouldn't have been that surprised if it had ended up being a really long one, based on how this has started, but allegedly that is not in fact the case. And the Misty Mountains well within their rights to, of course, just simply hold their position until the dwarves start to move on them. Snaga skirmishers move forwards. Another useful unit for breaking up any dwarven advance. Not the most damaging javelins in the world, but it's still ranged armor-piercing damage. And they're so cheap as well. Cheap javelins like this themselves and the Orc javelins, really good examples of that kind of unit. Still completely immobile here, the dwarves. Not even firing their missiles at this point. And I do wonder, more and more of the goblins are being emptied out of the settlements at this point, which leads me to believe the goblins are going to want to fight out here in the more open areas so they can utilise their numbers a bit more effectively. It would also mean that stuff like the Iron Watch might not be so easy to use. Might have missed a bit of a trick here by not moving forward more quickly, Petty. Some of Mighty Mirko's units have arrived. I'm not sure why some of them are so far ahead of the others. But some sentries of Khazad Dum and some 1st Legion pikes have arrived to Petty's position. And then I am going to be interested to see how the dwarves handle this situation at this point, because the goblins have got so much numbers now in depth that they are brought outside of the settlement. How do the dwarves engage this? They have to go all in all at once, because if they just commit individual bits of their force, they're just not going to have enough, and the goblins will just swallow it whole. So they're going to need to go all in once they arrive, which is probably why this battle is going to be fairly quick one way or the other. That very depleted unit of Bulge Champions is being pulled around all over the place by the mercenary crossbowmen. I have to say, I mean, to be fair, Medieval Feud isn't really having to look after the rest of his army, because the rest of his army is just sort of sat there waiting for the green light to attack. But he's done a good job at microing this unit of mercenary crossbowmen, and they are a very micro-intensive unit in this sort of situation as well. They're not getting counter-skirmished by archers, which is their primary weakness. Most cavalry archers do have a weakness to foot archers after all, and the mercenary crossbowmen even more so because of their lower range. Bulge Champions, though, still taking damage. There's plenty of pikes still. And now shots coming in from the Orc Hunters as well. Bulge Champions at this point so damaged and depleted that their hit points must be gone, and they are an unshielded cavalry unit as well. Troll drummers continue to bang on their drums. I mean, like I said, the goblins really could go forward and kill Medieval Feud's army, I feel like. Heavy Goblin Crossman probably going to try and do that now, because Mighty Mirko, the main body of his force at this point, is still a fair ways off, and it's still just marching as well. At the very least, you could force him to run by attacking Medieval Feud, and at that point all of their units are going to be exhausted by the time they get into melee with you, which is just another feather in your cap if you're the goblins, and they are going to continue to move further out, and you can see they are moving towards Medieval Feud. If I were him, I'd be really worried at the sight of this many goblins moving towards my army's position. The Drake Broodling is going to move forward as well, and they can of course move in with a holding force over here as well to prevent Petty from suddenly going to his allies' aid. So I really like this idea from the goblins. If anything, they should have done it sooner, I think. Crossbow bolts coming in now. What are they going to be going after? I mean, crossbow bolts can damage pretty much anything given a bit of time. So you may as well target something like the Mithril Guard down, or the sentries wouldn't be the worst target either. Take away their ability to really hold the line effectively. Ooh, and what is this? Yeah, he just lost Micro on his mercenary crossbowman when he saw all the goblins start to meander their way towards him, and the Drake Broodlings and Warg Skirmishers finish them off. You can see they are going to set up out here now, so it's a bit of a bizarre siege, to be honest. Those Warg Skirmishers do charge in. They don't hit the mercenary crossmen. Most of what that charge was hit the Orc Hunters of Khazad Dum, but still, it's good damage. Heavy Goblin Infantry being engaged by the mercenary infantry as well. The Mountain Orc Berserkers charging forward, and they will actually manage to kill off a couple of those mounted crossbowmen, but then they will rapidly be held at bay by the sentries of Khazad Dum. And the dwarves are going to move forward here. The mercenaries shaken up already as a result of the goblins coming towards them. Those maces will be useful against the heavy goblin infantry, and especially those big axes from the dwarves, and with a bit of support from the dwarves, the mercenary guildsman morale does stabilise itself. Like I said though, I really do like the way that they have set out their stall here, the goblins. They have a really good opportunity here to overwhelm this dwarven army. Now it will cost them more than it cost to bring down Sharkan. They had all of their mounted companies to help hammer and anvil Sharkan's army, and Sharkan's army ultimately was not all that well put together. Medieval Feuds is a little bit more well balanced, and the dwarven quality will serve him quite well here. Forward comes some Goblin King's bodyguard. Black Uruks of the mountains getting into melee, surrounding this unit of 3rd Legion. They'll need a little bit of support, but there's support all around them, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue, especially if the Mountain Orc Berserkers are going along the side there. Meanwhile over here, Bloodbath McGrath, they should just hold defensive position here. They're taking a little bit of damage. They maybe got a little bit too close to this dwarven army, allowing their archers to get into range. There's plenty of crossbows that can be utilised as well though. Maybe a little bit more needed. Ooh, and catapult fire now going in on Petty's army. It's a long distance, but some potentially good targets here. Sentries of Khazad Dum taking damage, Orc Hunters, maybe 2 of the units that are less important to try and hit. Hammers of Gundabad would be good, obviously one of the bodyguard infantry units would be superb from their perspective. Meanwhile, Mountain Uruk host moving in to assist the Black Uruks, and that will be enough to, over time, overwhelm this unit of 3rd Legion, especially without that armour upgrade. Volk's champions are in behind the line, helping these Mountain Orc Berserkers do damage against the Hammers at Gundabad, but ultimately the Hammers will come out of this fight the better of the two, most certainly. The frontline fight, however, is the most important one here, and I feel as though the Misty Mountains actually haven't committed enough. They've still got units that are waiting around in front of the settlement itself, and I think they should have gone all in here to try and kill this army off and just leave a token force to defend from the other side, if this was how they were going to try and do things. Javelins coming in, doing tons of damage to those 3rd Legion infantry. Warriors of Khazad Dum are being overwhelmed by a combination of the lower and upper tier halberdiers that the Misty Mountains have at their disposal. Orc Hunters of Khazad Dum. Weapons drawn now. They've got decent melee defense, being a dual-wielding unit, but it's often a sign of desperation when you see them having to try and man the front lines. Crossbows there as well. What are the Meteor Guard doing, I wonder, at this point? So yeah, they are on the front line, and they will be doing the business most certainly against the Mountain Uruk host. Something that the Misty Mountains will really struggle to burn down effectively are the Meteor Guard. They'll need like javelins or crossbows. White Uruk Fearmonger is probably the best choice of melee unit. Blackbacks can do damage, but they will ultimately lose because they don't have the same sort of survivability. There's a few patches of burnt dwarves now. How thematic. At the hands of those crossbows. Also, the hands of that catapult, but speaking of, the crossbows are also over here firing bolts into this position from the dwarves. Mighty Mirko's army has almost fully arrived at this point, which you would have to imagine then the dwarves over here need to start moving forward. I'd start moving forward now, honestly, because it's very obvious they're just looking to pin you in place. So you should be able to win this front line fairly comfortably. Heavy Goblin Spears, Black Uruks, I mean, not bad units, but you as Khazad Dum have got such an edge over the Goblins. And sitting back just allows this full firing line of Heavy Goblin Crossbows to start really peeling away at your front line. And that is the last thing you want. Meanwhile, over here, the Goblins continuing to push forward. Snaga Skirmishers now getting into melee out of ammunition. More Javelins continuing to fire their payload in. 2nd Legion Axe Guard and Meteor Guard taking that damage. It'll still take a while to bring down the Meteor Guard that way, but at least you're doing damage to the right kind of unit. They have more Snaga Skirmishers over there as well, Halberdiers, catapult shots streaking away in the background over there. And their White Uruk Fearmongers, also again one of the best units that the Misty Mountains can use. Throwing axes being utilised in the backfield there, Khazad Dum Reclaimers who look pretty depleted honestly, so I'd imagine they've been trading volleys with a numerically superior Snaga Skirmisher force, or perhaps a unit of crossbows that was moved away. Mountain Uruk host getting into the backfield, finishing off the Hammers of Gundabad, ultimately overwhelming them, so it's not looking good for Medieval Feud this. He's winning nearest to, can't really call it a moat, but the ditch in front of AZANULBIZAR. He's winning this engagement on the back of the Meteor Guard and his 2nd Legion, but everywhere else he's losing, and that of course means that all of those other units are going to turn around and overwhelm. The Meteor Guard going to have to deal with more Snaga Skirmishers. Not going to be too much of a problem for them, but it keeps them pinned in place just that little bit longer. for the Misty Mountains purposes. More javelins moving forward, more Snaga skirmishers, the ultimate example of a swarm this. Heavy goblin spears pushing through. Going after those Khazad Dum reclaimers now. Armour piercing damage going to be laid down. Through come the Drake Broodlings. And that does, I mean, the Orc Hunters are routing. The Khazad Dum reclaimers don't have lock morale, I don't believe. They're shaken, so that, yeah, they can be routed. Their morale values are very high though, so it's about as close as you can get to locked without actually being locked. Still, the dwarves are just content to sit here in place, which is just allowing those heavy goblin crossbows to get as much damage as they want downrange. I think this is a massive mistake from the dwarves, to be honest, and it may be the thing which puts this battle out of reach, because all of the Misty Mountains forces then are going to be able to focus on just one part of the Dwarven assault. With Medieval Feud and Sharkan's armies long gone, all that they have left can be poured into trying to deal with Petty and Mighty Mirko's armies. And I think they have missed a bit of a trick here, the dwarves, because with their powers combined they could smash through this outer defence, this sort of rear guard that the Misty Mountains have got going on pretty easily. Like that is, there's some decent units in there, but nothing on Khazad Dum's levels, like I said. Medieval Feud's general at this point has fallen. The Mithril Guard getting charged by the Drake Broodlings. They've got a big charge bonus as well. The Blackback Berserkers are now in there. They're taking javelin fire, and that is going to be the end, I think, for the Mithril Guard. They're the only unit that's left fighting over here, and once again, they took a little bit longer than I thought they were going to about it here, the Misty Mountains, but they identified an army that was cut off from immediate support and overwhelmed and crushed it, and that is what a numbers-focused approach can give you. You can have the quality of Khazad Dum all you want, but if you get overrun by that kind of force, it's looking pretty bad for you, honestly. But the balance of power is still only just in the Misty Mountains' favour, and I do believe that's because Mighty Mirko's army was the best quality Khazad Dum army on the field, and I would actually follow that up with Petty's, so the two most quote-unquote useful Khazad Dum armies are still here, but having said that, they're still taking damage. And if the battle is going to take place actually more out in the open, then you would have to back the Misty Mountains to continue to look like the dominant ones in this particular fight. You still have reclaimers, plenty of bodyguard tier units. The guards of Khazad Dum in particular are going to be a bit of a problem for the Misty Mountains, because they can chuck out damage very, very quickly. At this point they're probably going to move forward with all of their support. So the trolls, some of them a little bit bloodied up from the initial fight against Sharkan's army, but they could also be so useful for disrupting those dwarven formations if they decide to continue to be aggressive, which I think they should be. It may be very tempting at this point to cut your losses and return to AZANULBIZAR, but like I said, I think you want to keep the engagements wide, out in the open as much as possible. More catapult shots coming in. With all of these units in loose formation, you're not going to do a ton of damage all at once, but you can also scarcely miss. So you're going to continue to even those odds, and the Misty Mountains actually maybe attacking a little bit too soon in here. Here come the heavy goblin spears. A bit of armour piercing won't go amiss, certainly against the warriors of Khazad Dum. Maybe they're just hoping to bait out the ranged threats like the Khazad Dum reclaimers who are firing their missiles. More worryingly for them, I suppose, are the Iron Watch and Mirrormere. That would be, I think, Khazad Dum's only chance for turning this battle around if the heavy goblins, just the goblin army, blobs up to such an extent that the Iron Watch can really start to pull it back in terms of kills and then let their melee units do the rest. 2nd Legion Axe Guard getting tagged there as well. In come the Mountain Orc Berserkers with the Goblin King's Bodyguard, interestingly enough. Going to do some damage to the 4th Legion, but with Mithril Guard on hand, they'll show the goblins what a real line infantry unit is. Snaga skirmishers over here, catapult continuing to fire as well. And still, there's so many crossbows over here, it's a withering crossbow storm. And the dwarves have sat in their sights for far too long, in my opinion. So many of those pikes have died needlessly. I'm actually surprised, like, the goblins haven't even been targeting down the right units for me. If you were going after this unit of 1st Legion pikes, you could be having such a good time of it. Orc Hunters, they still have a bit of ammunition. It doesn't look like it. It looks like they've got their weapons drawn. Again, bad signs. That is a very densely packed unit of guards of Khazad Dum. One unfortunate volley from the Dwarven perspective and things could really start to go sideways for you, if they haven't already. Second Legion Axe Guard are there. Javelins. The goblins just allowing a bit of a gap for those javelins to wear down the dwarves ever further. What are they going to hit this time? I think they are going for that unit of guards of Khazad Dum, and why not? If you get one hit, you can get so much value so quickly. And as we look further back, you can see the Misty Mountains are only going to continue their relentless assault of trolls. More goblins arriving towards the front, of varying utility in melee, but at this point it's just a numbers game. And if I were the Misty Mountains, yeah, you just throw yourselves forward. I mean, wave-based assaults at this point I think are perfectly fine for the Misty Mountains. You don't want to blob up all at once. Under normal circumstances I would say it's a good idea, but not with the Iron Watch loitering around somewhere over here. Unless they've already been killed. Surely not. Where are the Iron Watch? Did they get killed? Were they focused down by the crossbows or something when we were beholding the assault on Medieval Feud's army? I suppose it's not beyond the realms of possibility. If that is in fact the case, then yeah, just go all in. Crush the dwarves underfoot with your superior numbers. Even the First Legion pikes will struggle. There's javelins being utilised. First Legion should rack up one hell of a kill count in this sort of engagement, but the battle has already gotten away from the dwarves a little bit here, I feel. Snaga, still so many javelins, and that has also been a real key to this battle. Armour-piercing missiles from the Misty Mountains. There are better crossbows than the heavy goblin crossbows, there are certainly better javelins than the Snaga skirmishers, but they've been used so effectively in this battle, along with their ranged units. All of the aspects of the Misty Mountains army that aren't their infantry corps, they've used really, really well. Because you don't want to go infantry to infantry with Khazad Dum if you're the Misty Mountains, and you know that's not how you win a battle like this. And they've tilted the odds in their favour so much that the infantry fight ultimately, even with the quality Khazad Dum still have, they're going to struggle. Through go the Drake Broodlings. They do get through the lines. They need to be very, very careful, of course, of the First Legion pikes. They do need to get more reinforcements on the front line here, though, the Misty Mountains. As efficient as their engagements are being, they do need to go for the throat at some point. Sons of the Fallen, chasing these Drake Broodlings, they're really just being a nuisance here in the backfield at this point. The dwarves do still have reserves. Reserves of very good quality as well. Plenty of shock infantry back here, plenty of bodyguard units, Sons of the Fallen as well, for extra holding power. More of these javelins continuing to be used. You know, they need more quality on the front line here. They need to just throw everything in, I think, at this stage. Mithril Guard moving in. I mean, if the dwarves can make this all about melee quality and the Misty Mountains do not move to overwhelm them, they could still win this fight. It would be one of the most remarkable throws in Reforged I think I've ever seen. They've done all of the hard work, really, the Misty Mountains. At this point, all they need to do is put the squeeze to the dwarves, and if they fail at doing that, it would be a real shame, because they've played well up to this point. Forward come the Snaga skirmishers. The dwarves are starting to work up the line at this point, so the Snaga are going to at least stand in the way to prevent them from doing that. I thought one of the Mithril Guard died, no, he didn't. He just got staggered by the initial charge. Heavy Goblin crossbows, who have still got their crossbows drawn. If that is the case, they should be using them as quickly as possible. There goes one of the Goblin generals. There you can see the First Legion pikes really doing the business. Another unit of heavy Goblin spears trudging forwards. Very depleted unit of sentries of Khazad Dum there. Between the spears and the Mountain Orc Berserkers, that could compromise the side of the line. More routing going on from the Misty Mountains. This is why you need to send forward more of a substantial force. They've got all of this stuff back here going to waste. You really don't want to be getting into this sort of game with the dwarves. Like, in terms of numbers, it still looks so heavily in the Misty Mountains' favour, but considering the kind of units that Khazad Dum traffic in, you can't afford to give them away back into a fight like this. The spears and the Mountain Orc Berserkers also having to deal with the Mithril Guard, who have changed their focus. Continuing to swing those axes with reckless abandon. And the dwarves, victorious in large swathes of the line. There are still some goblins on the front line fighting the good fight. And there are Sons of the Fallen taking javelin fire. Again, they're very fortunate really that the Snaga skirmishers' overall damage is relatively limited. But slowly but surely, those Snaga skirmishers will start to impact the dwarves. This next wave, heavy goblin halberds. Guards of Khazad Dum are still yet to be committed. What's that back there? That's another unit of guards of Khazad Dum. Hammers. Yeah, the Iron Watch must have died at some point to the crossbows, I would assume. Which is a real shame, because with the Iron Watch, Khazad Dum could have turned this around, I feel. Either that or they were committed to melee in suicidal fashion. Heavy Goblin Halberds trying to go toe-to-toe with the 1st Legion Pikes. It's not going to go very well for them, you have to say. Only 33 1st Legion Pikes remaining, but what a unit they are. There are Sons of the Fallen helping. The depleted unit of sentries over here, which should stop the advance of the Heavy Goblin Spears, armor piercing or no. Back over there as well, the Blackback Mountain Berserkers. Mountain Orc Berserkers, victory is a distinct possibility. More and more goblins being committed to the front line, and there's a little bit of disorganisation starting to fall around the Dwarven lines. They need to be fighting as one more so than they're currently doing if they wanted to have any hope at really winning this. But still, the trash hordes continue to trudge their way forwards. It seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Snaga being committed to the front line. And over here the trolls are now being committed, which is causing a gap to appear in the lines. The Black Uruks flooding through behind Dwarven lines. They will be met by the guards of Khazad Dum, which is obviously bad news for the Black Uruks, but if the Misty Mountains can continue to send more units through here, they've got an opportunity to get in behind Dwarven lines, and then that really would be the end. The thin dwarf line at this point, which is holding on as desperately as it can. There's also some units of actual quality from the goblins on the front line now. Mountain Uruk host, much more capable of putting up a fight than the heavy goblins that are around them. They are having to go up against Khazad Dum reclaimers, but again, it's a matter of differing numbers at this point. Petty is still on the front line with Mighty Mirko. One player of missed defeat. That must be one of the goblin players, actually. Which is quite interesting. That catapult probably out of ammunition at this point. Well, it probably still has rotting meat as an ammunition type, but you really don't want to be using that in this situation because you're more likely to sabotage yourselves as the Misty Mountains. Still some Fearmongers left alive, and there's that unit of Snow Trolls that could charge in at any moment. Let's go down to half speed here. There's a lot going on. The Dwarven units that are starting to rout from the front line. Plenty of heavy Goblin Halberdiers. This has really been like the purest example of a Dwarf Goblin battle that we've seen, in the sense that the Goblins have gone so heavily into their numbers. And they pulled the Uno reverse card, really, in terms of what this battle was going to be. They started off on the defence of AZANULBIZAR, but in the end flooded outside and met the Dwarves in the open, which is where their superior numbers were always going to be a little bit more useful. And the Dwarven quality simply not able to keep pace with them throughout most of this fight. 4th Legion Shield Guard starting to rout now as well. Sons of the Fallen, I don't believe they're locked morale. They maybe should be, alongside the Hammers of Gundabad, considering what the Sons of the Fallen are. Projectiles, they're probably crossbow bolts, actually. Indeed they are. Plenty of Goblin Infantry being destroyed. Hammers of Gundabad pursuing some sort of unit. There's some Mountain Orc Berserkers here in the backfield finishing off some of these warriors, and they are being chased by the locked morale Hammers of Gundabad. Trolls marching all over the line, banging their very shoddy looking drums. Legion Bodyguard moving in to help back up the Mithril Guard and Sons of the Fallen. A very strong unit of infantry, the Legion Bodyguard, but at this point the numbers really aren't looking too kind for them. There's also still Blackbacks left alive, although they've taken damage. They're the kind of unit which does tend to fizzle out pretty quickly in typical Berserker fashion once their hit points are gone. They're a little bit more tanky in terms of stats and stuff like the Uruk-hai Berserkers and the Black Waltz, but ultimately they're still much more of an aggressive unit than a defensive one. There's still these Black Uruks, plenty of Mountain Uruk host as well. Yeah. And it is ultimately a lost cause for the Dwarves. Not the closest battle by any means, but it's still a fun battle to behold, and it really does go to show you really need to consolidate yourselves as the attackers on a map like this. If you're disorganised, if you're scattered, and if the defenders are willing to hunt down the attackers one by one. Like, as the defenders, you can be aggressive in this way and be successful. You don't necessarily have to just sit in your shape and try and outlast the enemy, because if they had done that, considering tools like the Iron Watch, considering how strong the First Legion showed themselves to be here in the later stages of this battle, it could have gone sideways for them fairly easily, I think. Snaga skirmishers firing in the background there. I do like the look of the Sons of the Fallen. I like the shields. I do also like the updated version of their spear weapon as well. It used to be a bit too chunky at the end for my liking. It looks a little bit sleeker now, which, even though the dwarves are all about that chunky weaponry, like a chunky spear is not necessarily all that useful. Still Snaga. There's still Hammers of Gundabad back here. They're being outright overwhelmed, however, by the Mountain Walk Berserkers that are flooding over them at this point. A lot of them are getting bloodied up. They sacrifice a lot for their attack there, the Mountain Orc Berserkers. Go back up to 1 speed. The Trolls are in here getting very bloodied up, as you would expect, considering the calibre of Dwarven unit they're against, but so many halberdiers all around them. Still a few bolts coming in. A few of them probably getting some friendly fire, but since when has friendly fire ever bothered the Misty Mountains? They have reserves. Not very many guards of Khazad Dum left. They probably weren't all that effective in this situation, to be honest with you, because they were committed to an engagement that was already hopeless, to be honest. So they were probably not able to lay down their full effectiveness, even though, in terms of an infantry unit, they are probably the best against the Misty Mountains. Yes, the Mithril Guard are tougher, but I think the damage that the guards of Khazad Dum can kick out is more important, especially seeing as the Misty Mountains in general. You don't need as much survivability to survive against an individual unit against them. Then again, the Misty Mountains are not about individual units, as this battle very clearly demonstrates. It's probably the purest example of a Misty Mountain battle we've ever seen on my channel. The Horde Unleashed. Heavy Goblin Halberds. There can't be much left of the dwarves now, surely. Is there anything in the backfield? There are Cave Troll Drummers all the way back over here. What's going on over here? There are allegedly still units. Oh, there are Iron Watch of Miromir back here. What were they doing all the way back over here? Oh, you hate to see it. Petty concealing some of his units at the back, and for no real reason. Honestly, the Iron Watch on that front line against the blobs of goblins that were there, it could have been a different story. It was always going to be an uphill battle for Khazad Dum after those two armies were overwhelmed, but it's almost a criminal offence to have your Iron Watch all the way back over there, cowering in the back of the field, scared. And unfortunately that player there losing his bottle. I've not seen that name before though, so he must be a newer player, so I don't want to be too harsh, but that has to be a lesson there. You can't afford to just conceal your two most powerful units at the back of the map and hope to use them for the late game and be the hero, because in the end you just end up looking like a clown. Because there's no way you can beat the goblins at this point. They're hunting you down. They're on the way. They've got a delivery to make. There really isn't anything left in terms of dwarves there. The goblins can afford to be very happy. There is one dwarf still here, one Son of the Fallen. But surely he's going to die now. Indeed he does. And that is going to be that. There's still some bodyguards on the front line here, I think. Yes, there is. One bodyguard, and then he gets shanked in the back by a crossbow man of all point, or a crossbow goblin. And now the hunt begins. Iron Watch simply being silenced by one drummer. And now the Mountain Orc Berserkers are also getting in here, which will prevent those mortars from being used. And now the end begins. Snaga skirmishers, they still have a bit of ammunition. They probably don't want to be the ones to engage in melee, although I guess it doesn't really matter at this point. Just throw anything you can in there and just have them do what they can in melee. Snaga are easily replaceable after all, and AZANULBIZAR will certainly be remaining in goblin hands for now. In come the snow trolls, cause a bit of disruption, be a menace, as they have been right from the start, and Misty Mountains are more than deserving winners of this battle, of course. I really like battles where the defenders decide to be ultra aggressive, and this is pretty much the textbook example of a map where you can do that on. Oftentimes there's a grace period to allow the attackers to get into position. If that had been the case here, then obviously it wouldn't have worked. But this is one of the reasons why I think grace periods are often far too generous, because it takes away the possibility of something interesting like this happening. But that's just me. And I kind of like the fact that on this occasion that wasn't the case. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. I think it'll take more than a military genius to win this battle. I think divine intervention would be needed for Khazad Dum here. But the Misty Mountains' finest hour on my channel, I would say. Just in terms of what they're all about, and we saw it on full display here. And that is going to be that. A significant victory for the Misty Mountains. You can see actually the kill count still relatively even, in spite of the fact the Misty Mountains were the defenders, but just look at the amount of manpower they had deployed here. Normally you see the attackers vastly outnumbering. On this occasion, Sharkan did outnumber Proxima Centuri's army, but I would assume that's because Proxima probably had the highest number of mounted units for the Misty Mountains, or fast movers if you count the Drake Broodlings, and also the Snow Trolls because of how quick they are. But the rest of the Misty Mountains armies were obviously quite large. Not as large as they can be, to be fair. We can see the Misty Mountains exceed 3,000 men quite easily. But again, quite a few cavalry units, quite a few units of skirmishers as well, which do tend to be a little bit on the smaller side. And because they are the defenders as well, you're going to see the odd elite unit here and there. Mountain Uruk Host and Black Uruks forming that quality spine around the mountain of heavy goblins, light goblins, and Snaga that they had. So let's see what did the damage for each of the Misty Mountains armies in turn. Thanatos' army, a few units breaking 100, not surprising to see that be the crossbows. It was really the last engagement where we saw Petty and Mighty Mirko's armies get killed, where the crossbows really did a lot of good work, because the dwarves were content to just sit there and allow the crossbows to reap their harvest, which was obviously not great for them. Drake Broodlings did well. All of the fast movers, like that was really the story of the battle early on. Sharkan's army was obviously completely overwhelmed by the amount of fast movers that the Misty Mountains had. Other than that, Goblin King's Bodyguard and Blackback Berserkers doing very, very nicely for Nawaki's army. White Uruk Fearmongers, again the heavy Goblin crossbows showing themselves to be worthwhile. The rest of the army, just again, it's all about the numbers, so individual units are rarely going to get tons and tons of kills. Snaga Skirmishers doing very well though. They were allowed to get some good shots off, and the Bolgs Champions again, another mounted unit. Proxima Centauri, heavy Goblin crossbows once again. Other than that, Snaga Skirmishers, ranged units all round, catapult, as you would expect. In melee, that's not really where you're going to do your finest job against Khazad Dum, because they're obviously going to have the edge there. And Bloodbath McGrath, Blackback Berserkers doing the business, all of his crossbows breaking 100 kills, which if you're Khazad Dum, that is a huge red flag as to where you went wrong in this battle, especially considering as it was out in the open. There's also the Snaga Skirmishers breaking 100 kills. The other two got very, very close too. Snaga Skirmishers is such a cheap unit as well that you really can't be allowing them to get that much value off against good units of Dwarven infantry and the Drake Broodlings. So yeah, fast movers and ranged unit, all of the supporting tools around their numbers focused infantry corps is why the Misty Mountains had such a dominant victory here today. So yeah, big thank you to Thanatos for giving this battle to me, and a big thank you to all the players for being a part of it. A very unique battle, even though it wasn't the closest, it was still a very unique battle. We didn't actually get to see the inside of AZANULBIZAR all that much, which is a bit of a shame because it's quite a detailed little Dwarven settlement, but I'm sure that it's a map we shall see sometime in the future as well. Bit of information now though. From my perspective, when I'm recording this, I should know very soon what's going to be happening long term. So from my perspective, I'm like right at the start of February. There should be a live stream happening within a week, 2 weeks, where the future of the channel in terms of the changes I'm going to be implementing is going to be really hammered out, and the timetable for that. Yeah, I don't know exactly when that's going to be. I have an idea of what's going to be happening now, but we'll just have to wait and see. Suffice it to say, you know, the two options that I laid out in the previous live stream on New Year's Day are pretty much still there. It's either going to be happening very soon, or there'll still be a few months of sort of business as usual before the changes get implemented. Either way, the changes are coming, so do be prepared for that. Ultimately, I think the changes are going to be relatively minor. Like going from essentially 3 videos a week to 2 videos a week is not really that big of a deal, and occasionally there will be other bits and pieces of content as well that I can sprinkle in there as and when I have the time to do so. So to be honest, the impact on the channel, I know I've been mentioning it pretty constantly over the course of the last couple of months really, but the actual impact of this is going to be fairly limited, I think. From my perspective, again, this is really going to be me as well, just reiterating what I probably already said in a live stream. But it does pay, because not everyone is going to be watching the live stream. Some people may be watching this. So it's a good idea to sort of keep reiterating this. Ultimately, the impact is going to be relatively limited from your perspective. I'm going to be sort of completely changing the workflow of how I do this. But in terms of what you are actually seeing, you may get slightly less content overall. Obviously 2 videos a week being the norm instead of the 3, sometimes 4 that I do at the moment. But again, like I said, fairly limited, I think. I hope, anyway. All of these things can be subject to change, of course. You know, you can't fully commit to any of these things without knowing exactly how things are going to be working, the ins and outs of it. But it is my intent that the channel will not be going anywhere. Certainly not in the near future or the mid-term future. Sort of, you can't really account for what's going to be happening in the longer term, but that's going to be how it is. Like, I really don't want the channel to go anywhere, because it is nice. It's a nice little thing that I've got going on, and I'd like to think of myself as being somewhat useful for the third age, the various third age communities to varying extents. But yeah, if anything does change regarding that, I'm sure that I will have already let you know in the live stream, which will be updating this. But as far as I'm aware, this should just be a reiteration in terms of the details of that. And the actual timetable for the changes that I'm talking about now, I should have already mentioned as well. I don't know exactly what they are from my perspective yet, but you probably will already know them at this point, given that this replay is going to be out sometime in early March, I think. But yeah, big thanks to all of the players once again, Thanatos especially, for sending me this rather unique battle. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.